The drilling rig wasn't supposed to be operational until next week. That's what made the find so strange. At 10:43 a.m., under a sky as wide and brutal as any Texas myth, a Parian drilling crew struck something solid 20 feet beneath the old caliche. The drill had whined, shuddered, and stopped metal, screaming against metal. For a moment no one moved. Then Jim Patterson, site manager, with a paunch and a tan as deep as leather, said the words that would ripple across Brewster County. "That's not rock." By noon, the sheriff's department had arrived. By 2:00 p.m., they knew what they were looking at. And by 3:30 p.m., a patrol car was kicking up dust in the long driveway of Walker Ranch. Thomas Walker didn't see it at first. He was elbow-deep in grease, hunched over the rusted belly of his John Deere tractor in the equipment shed. The late afternoon heat clung to everything metal flannel skin. His fingers ached from arthritis, but he didn't stop working. The old machines gave him something to focus on, something other than the silence Savannah had left behind. When the tires crunched over gravel, Thomas wiped his hands and stepped out of the shed. He squinted into the sun. 2 uniforms. One he recognized, Deputy Martinez, solid man, straight shooter. The other was new. Thomas nodded once. Afternoon officers. What's this about? Martinez removed his hat. It was a small gesture, but it said everything. Thomas's chest tightened. "We found something, Mr. Walker," Martinez said. "Something we think you need to see." Thomas crossed his arms, voice steady. "Well, don't keep me guessing. What did you find her bones?" The younger deputy shifted uncomfortably. "No, sir," Martinez replied. "We found her truck." Thomas stared at them. The words didn't make sense at first. It had been 9 years. 9 damn years. People didn't just disappear with a vehicle, not for that long. "You found the truck," he repeated. Martinez nodded. "Out near Terlingua, buried." Thomas let out a short, bitter laugh. "What, at the bottom of the Rio Grande?" The younger deputy answered, tone somber. "No, sir, it was underground. A drill team hit it. Looked like it had been placed there deliberately." Something in Thomas's stomach turned cold. Deliberately, he muttered. "We need you to come with us," Martinez said. "To confirm, to see for yourself." Thomas didn't answer right away. He turned toward the fields where Manuel was working with the cattle. His foreman had been with him for 20 years. Loyal, quiet, a good man. "Manuel," Thomas called. "I need you to watch the place. I'm heading out." Manuel jogged over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Everything all right, boss? They found her truck." Manuel's expression darkened. He said nothing, just nodded. Thomas climbed into the back of the patrol car without another word. The drive took over an hour. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. Yellow dust, red rocks, sagebrush clinging stubbornly to life. The patrol car hummed along the cracked 2-lane highway air conditioner, groaning against the heat. Thomas sat in silence. He had driven these roads himself 1,000 times, looking for her. Every mile a reminder of what he had lost. When they arrived near the Terlingua outskirts, the drill site was unmissable, a web of yellow tape, orange cones, oil workers in hard hats, and unmarked cruisers. At the center of it all hung a pickup truck, suspended by thick chains, dripping with mud and sand. Thomas stepped out of the vehicle. His legs felt heavy. Detective Rodriguez was waiting for him. They'd met before years ago when Savannah first went missing. Rodriguez had been new then. Clean suit, quiet confidence. Now his face looked older, drawn. "Mr. Walker," he said, extending a hand, "I'm sorry we're meeting like this." Thomas shook it, his gaze locked on the truck. Is it hers? Let's find out together. They approached the suspended vehicle. Jim Patterson, the site supervisor, stepped forward. We were drilling to reopen a capped site, Patterson explained. This spot was marked dormant since the 60s. But when we tried to clear the wellhead, we hit something hard. Thomas wasn't listening. His eyes were on the rust-red pickup, caked with earth windshield, cracked inward where the drill had punched through. Time had worn it, but not destroyed it. He knew that shape. He knew that paint job. It was Savannah's truck. I'll be damned, he whispered. Rodriguez motioned to a tent nearby. We've cataloged what was inside. Would you be willing to look? Thomas nodded numbly. Inside the tent, under sterile white light, lay a folding table filled with clear bags, each labeled and photographed. Her wallet, her hair tie, a silver necklace, her mother's, a tire gauge, a multi-tool. He reached out a hand, stopped short. She always kept the cross near the visor, he said. Rodriguez nodded. We found it tangled in the seatbelt. Thomas's voice cracked. These are hers, no doubt about it. Rodriguez let him breathe, then said, We didn't find remains. Thomas looked up sharply. No blood, no body, just the truck and her belongings. She didn't put it there herself. No, someone wanted it buried. Rodriguez gestured toward the well site. We think the old drilling hole was used on purpose. Someone knew the depth, covered it with a boulder, and let time take care of the rest. Thomas shook his head. She never came this far south. That area's 40 miles off her usual route. No reason for her to be near an abandoned oil site. Rodriguez didn't disagree. We're treating it as an active crime scene. Sheriff Ridge will be arriving shortly. Thomas's face hardened. Of course he would. The sheriff's SUV pulled in 20 minutes later, a swirl of dust trailing behind. Sheriff Clayton Ridge stepped out, adjusted his sunglasses, and gave Thomas a nod. Thomas, he said like they were old friends, meeting at a rodeo. Thomas didn't answer. Rodriguez briefed the sheriff quickly. Ridge listened, nodding, but his eyes kept returning to the truck. Well, hell, Ridge muttered. Somebody went through a lot of trouble to bury this thing. Looks that way, Rodriguez agreed. We'll get the dogs out here. Expand the search. Maybe she's nearby. Thomas turned. And if she's not? Ridge shrugged. Then we've still got questions, don't we? Rodriguez glanced at Thomas. I'll review the original files tonight. We're reopening the case officially. Thomas nodded, jaw clenched. Can I go now? Ridge raised an eyebrow. You don't want to stay. Thomas stared him down. Not if it means standing in the desert making small talk with the man who couldn't find my daughter 9 years ago. Rodriguez stepped between them. We'll drive you back. Ridge said nothing as Thomas walked away. On the ride home, the silence was thick. Rodriguez finally asked, What do you remember from that night? Thomas exhaled slowly. She left just after 8. Said she'd move the cattle, be back before midnight. She'd done it 100 times before. And you didn't report her missing until the next morning. I checked the grazing field myself that night, Thomas said. Cattle were still there. Truck was gone. I figured maybe she camped out or got a ride. Rodriguez nodded. We'll revisit the timeline. Everyone who worked the ranch then. Fine. When they pulled up to the ranch, Thomas turned to Rodriguez before getting out. If you really want to help, don't waste time chasing ghosts. Rodriguez looked at him. "What do you think I'm chasing?" Thomas stepped out of the car. "Not a ghost," he said. "A man who knew how to bury things real deep." By the time Thomas Walker returned to his ranch, the desert sun was beginning its descent, painting the land in streaks of gold and rust. Dust hung in the air like a held breath, and everything around him, the gate, the cattle, the barn, felt eerily unchanged, as if the discovery of Savannah's truck hadn't happened at all. But it had. The image of her rusted pickup hanging from the drilling rig was seared into his mind. Her wallet, her cross necklace, the tire gauge he'd given her. They hadn't been illusions. They were real, tangible proof of her presence and of something sinister. He parked his truck near the main house and stepped out, joints aching. As he walked toward the porch, he noticed a second vehicle parked in the shadow of the shed. White SUV, county plates. Sheriff's. His jaw tightened. Inside the house was quiet. The air smelled like cedar and dust. He stepped into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. The back of his neck prickled. "Thomas," came a voice from the hallway. "Didn't mean to barge in." Sheriff Ridge appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, eyes steady. Thomas didn't reply. "Mind if we sit?" Ridge asked. "I do," Thomas said, "but that hasn't stopped you before." Ridge gave a small, humorless smile. "Fair enough." He followed Thomas into the office at the rear of the house. The room was small and Spartan, filing cabinet, 2 chairs, a desk buried in livestock records and feed invoices. On the wall hung a framed photo of Savannah at 18, grinning on horseback, wind in her hair. The sheriff took the chair opposite Thomas without being asked. "I'll be quick," Ridge said, flipping open a small notebook. "You've told this story before." "I know, but with the truck found, we've got to reestablish timeline." Fresh eyes, standard protocol. Thomas leaned back, arms crossed. "Standard protocol is 9 years too late. I understand how this must feel." "Do you?" Thomas snapped. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like being asked the same damn questions all over again, while the people who actually did something walk free." Ridge's face didn't change. He clicked his pen twice before speaking. "Let's walk through it. One more time." Thomas inhaled deeply, then began. "She left just after 8 p.m. Took the west pasture route. We were rotating the cattle that week, water access issues. She knew that land better than anyone. What were you doing while she was out paperwork?" "Feed orders. Then I drove out to check when she didn't come back by 11. And you found cattle in the field, no truck, no Savannah." "Did that strike you as strange?" "Not immediately," Thomas said. "She was 28, sheriff, independent, tough. She'd camped out before." "It wasn't unusual. But you didn't try to reach her." "Call no signal out there. You know that." Ridge nodded, jotting notes. "So you waited until morning to contact us?" "Yes. You said you were in this office until 11 p.m. that night." "Anyone see you? Any verification?" Thomas's brows drew together. "You really asking me if I have an alibi for my own daughter's disappearance? I'm asking routine questions." "No." Thomas said, his voice sharp. "You're implying I had something to do with it." Ridge didn't flinch. "I'm implying that after 9 years we can't afford to assume anything." Thomas stood, walked to the window, stared out across the land he'd worked his whole life. "I buried her mother under that pecan tree out back," he said quietly. "Savannah was all I had left. You think I'd hurt her? No, Ridge said, but you were under pressure. Ranch failing. Bills mounting. Thomas turned slowly. You think I buried my own daughter in an oil well? I'm saying we need to consider all possibilities, including help. Could have been an accident. Could have been covered up. Thomas's fists clenched. I'm 62 years old, Ridge. You think I moved a truck, dumped it, and filled in the damn well all by myself without a single witness? Ridge closed his notebook. I'll be interviewing the rest of your staff. Just to cover ground, you go near Manuel and we'll have a real problem. Ridge stood. I'm doing my job. No, Thomas said. You're protecting someone, or covering for yourself. I don't know which. But you're not helping. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Ridge turned and walked toward the door. I'll be in touch, he said, stepping out onto the porch. Thomas didn't respond. He just watched him go. Later that afternoon, the air had grown heavy with heat and tension. Thomas stood at the fence line, staring into the open field, trying to calm the storm inside him. But the sheriff's questions lingered, the accusatory tone, the avoidance of real leads. And most of all, the timing. 9 years, no developments. Then suddenly the truck shows up. And the sheriff's first move is to interrogate him. Something wasn't right. He needed space, a clear head. Manuel, he called. Hold the fort. I'm going into town. The foreman nodded from the field. Thomas climbed into his pickup and pulled onto the long dirt road that led to Alpine. The Dusty Spur Tavern opened at 4 p.m., same as always. Cold beer, heavy blinds, and air conditioning strong enough to knock the sweat off your neck. Thomas took a seat at the bar, nodded to Jake the bartender. Whiskey, neat. Jake poured without asking. News played on the television in the corner, the drilling site, the truck dangling in the air. Jake quickly grabbed the remote and turned it off. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean... It's fine, Thomas muttered. A voice from a booth called out, Hey, I was watching that. Watch it later, Jake snapped. The man from the booth slid into the stool next to Thomas. 30s, maybe 40s, worn leather jacket, road dust on his jeans. Didn't mean to step on your grief, the man said. Thomas gave a small shake of his head. No harm done. The man stuck out a hand. Barry Granger. Thomas shook it. Thomas Walker. Barry paused. Walker. As in the girl they found the truck from. Yeah. Savannah was mine. Barry's face fell. Jesus. Sorry I didn't. Thomas waved it off. What brings you out this way? He asked. Barry sighed. Looking for my brother. Terry Granger. Used to be a cop here. Thomas blinked. Terry. I remember him. Traffic enforcement. Good guy. Quit years ago, didn't he? That's the problem, Barry said. No one seems to know. Official story says he moved to Mexico. No forwarding address. No resignation letter. And the year he vanished, Thomas asked slowly. Same year Savannah disappeared, Barry said. They stared at each other. Then Barry leaned forward. I think something happened to him. And I don't think anyone investigated. Thomas took a long sip of whiskey. Let's go talk to someone who might still care, he said. You got a ride? No. Then come with me. They pulled into the Alpine police station just before sunset. The receptionist looked up and smiled until she saw Thomas. Her smile faltered. Detective Rodriguez, and Thomas asked. He just stepped out. Sheriff Ridge. She hesitated. "He's in his vehicle, on a call." Thomas and Barry stepped outside. They saw the sheriff's SUV idling 2 rows down. Thomas started walking toward it. Barry followed. As they passed behind the vehicle, the sheriff's voice drifted from the open window. "No, I said handle it fast. Bones, yes. Deep enough they won't find him." Thomas stopped cold. The next words chilled him even more. Not Terry Granger. No one's asking about him anymore. Thomas motioned to Barry. "Get in the truck," he said quietly. "What?" "Just do it." They followed the sheriff's SUV as it pulled out of the lot and headed west. Neither man spoke for several minutes. Barry stared ahead, fists clenched in his lap. "He was talking about my brother," he said softly. "And someone else," Thomas said. "Bones. Burial." They drove past the edge of town. The road narrowed. The sheriff turned. So did they. At the edge of the desert, as the sun disappeared over the hills, Thomas killed the headlights and rolled to a stop behind a row of low brush. The sheriff's SUV sat ahead, parked near a broken-down farmhouse. Another vehicle approached. They watched in silence as 2 men emerged, opened the back of their car, and pulled out a bound figure, limp, unmoving, possibly unconscious. They loaded the body into the sheriff's SUV. Barry's voice was hoarse. "Oh, God." Thomas reached for his phone. "We're calling Rodriguez." The road wound out of Alpine like a cracked ribbon of asphalt disappearing into desert shadow. The last rays of sunlight painted the distant mountains blood orange. In the rearview mirror, dust swirled like ghosts, memories clawing their way out of the past. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tighter. Next to him, Barry sat silent, his jaw clenched. He kept glancing back toward the horizon, where Sheriff Ridge's SUV had vanished minutes ago after picking up the limp-bound figure from the abandoned farmhouse. Neither man had spoken since they pulled away from the sheriff's suspicious rendezvous. They didn't need to. Thomas reached for the dial on the console and punched in Detective Rodriguez's number, voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. "Try again in 5, Barry said. "He's probably in a debrief. You know how it is with these crime scene scrambles." "Doesn't sit right," Thomas muttered. "Not after what we saw. Sheriff taking someone alive or dead into custody with zero backup, no lights, and no record." "And no hesitation," Barry added. "Like he'd done it before." They didn't return to the ranch that night. Instead, they parked in a gravel lot across from the station and waited, watching the front doors. At 7:42 p.m., Rodriguez pulled in his badge, still clipped to his belt jacket, slung over his shoulder. Thomas jumped out of the truck before Barry could stop him. "Detective!" he called. Rodriguez turned surprised. "Thomas." Barry caught up breathless. "We need to talk. Now." Inside the lobby, Officer Hernandez looked up as they entered. Her smile froze halfway when she saw their faces. "This about Ridge?" she asked quietly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You knew?" She leaned in. "There's been whispers. Nothing official, but weird stuff. Cases reassigned, body cams missing, calls rerouted." Rodriguez waved her off. "Give us a minute, Pat." And they moved into a side office, bare except for a whiteboard, a desk, and 2 metal chairs. Barry closed the door behind them. Thomas wasted no time. "We followed Ridge," he said. "He met with 2 men at a farmhouse off Highway 67. They transferred a bound individual from their car to the sheriff's SUV. We saw it." Rodriguez paled. Are you absolutely sure? 4 eyes, Barry said. No doubts. Thomas leaned forward. You're running point now. The sheriff's compromised. We need to act before he buries this literally. Rodriguez ran a hand through his hair. Damn. I had my suspicions. He's been dodging me, blocking access to Savannah's old case files. Said he'd reprocess them himself. Classic cover-up, Thomas growled. That girl in the SUV could be Savannah, or someone else they're planning to silence. Barry added, and Ridge mentioned my brother, Terry, like he was still relevant. Rodriguez stood. I'll issue a bolo on Ridge's vehicle, quietly, and dispatch an unmarked unit to the farmhouse. You two go home. We're not sitting this out, Thomas said. Not asking permission, Barry added. Rodriguez hesitated. Then don't get yourselves killed, he said finally. They didn't go home. Instead, they returned to the dusty spur where it had all begun. Same bartender, same seats. Jake looked up as they entered. Twice in one day, Thomas used starting a trend. Whiskey, Thomas said. Neat, and 2 sandwiches if you got 'em. Jake nodded and grabbed a bottle. The TV was on a Gen news cycle, still buzzing about the buried truck. A photo of Savannah flashed on screen. Younger, vibrant, smiling on horseback. Barry stared at it. I only saw her once, he said quietly. Back when Terry still worked here. He took me out to the ranch for 4th of July. She lit up the fire pit like she owned the stars. Thomas didn't answer. His fingers wrapped tightly around the glass. She was light, he said finally. In a world that keeps trying to put out every good thing. Jake returned with their food. You fellas look like death chased you halfway here. Everything all right? Thomas shook his head. Jake whistled. Never is it? Before Thomas could reply, a bush entered the bar, middle-aged, dark jacket, clipboard under one arm. He scanned the room. When he saw Thomas, he smiled. Mr. Walker, I'm Special Agent Layla Moore, FBI. Barry blinked. FBI. Detective Rodriguez called me in early, Moore said, lowering her voice. After hearing your report, he believes this might go beyond county lines. Possibly trafficking organized. We've been watching Ridge for a while, but never had a witness. Thomas stood. What now? We need to find out where Ridge went, and who he handed that person off to. She pulled out a phone, swiped across a screen. This is satellite imaging taken 45 minutes after your observation. Ridge's vehicle entered a secondary road 11 miles past the farmhouse. There's only one structure out there, an old feed barn. Thomas's stomach dropped. That barn used to belong to the Sykes family, long bankrupt. Sheriff handled the foreclosure himself. Convenient, Moore said. Barry stood. Let's go. No, Moore said sharply. You're witnesses. If Ridge suspects you followed him, you're in danger. Thomas stepped forward. If that person is Savannah, then you'll want to be alive to see her again, Moore said evenly. Let us handle the breach. You'll be notified the moment we have visual confirmation. They waited at the station. Minutes bled into hours. Rodriguez returned. He looked worn down, older than the day before. We breached the barn. Thomas stood so fast his chair fell over. There was a silo underneath, Rodriguez said. Hidden, reinforced. Inside, we found a woman. Thin, weak, malnourished, blindfolded, but alive. Thomas's legs gave out. Barry caught him before he hit the floor. She said your name, Thomas, Rodriguez said gently. She said, "My dad's still looking for me, isn't he?" Thomas's hands covered his face. "She's at the hospital now," Moore added. "We've secured the wing. No press, no interference. But she's asked to see you." The hospital was quiet when they arrived. Savannah lay in a private room of fear in her arm face, hollowed but unmistakable. She opened her eyes when Thomas entered. "Dad," she whispered. His vision blurred. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside her bed. "I'm here," he said. "I never stopped looking." Savannah's fingers brushed his. "I knew you wouldn't." She closed her eyes and began to cry. Back at the station, Barry sat in silence. He hadn't asked to see his brother yet. Rodriguez returned with a thick file. "Your brother's alive," he said. "Bad shape, whipped, starved. They kept him in a separate location, drug production. He's stable now, wants to see you." Barry didn't move. "When?" he asked. "Now." Thomas sat beside Savannah for hours. She drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally whispering things that didn't make sense. The barn lights, the red ledger, the cartel woman with the soft voice. He took note of them all. When a nurse entered, he asked softly, "Did she ever mention Sheriff Ridge?" The nurse hesitated. She said he visited, brought supplies, said it was protection, but she was terrified every time he came. Thomas nodded, fury boiling beneath the surface. Ridge hadn't just covered for a cartel. He had owned the cage. That night, Rodriguez called Thomas again. "We reviewed Ridge's phone records. He was working with a man named Miguel Salazar, cartel enforcer, on our most wanted list. Salazar was moving product through Ridge's territory in exchange for favors." "Favors like burying trucks?" Thomas asked. "And silencing witnesses," Rodriguez said. "But Ridge made a mistake," Moore added. "He underestimated you." Thomas sat back, weary but resolved. He underestimated a father. The knock on the hospital room door came just after midnight. Thomas Walker stirred in the plastic chair, stiff from hours of waiting beside his daughter's bed. Savannah lay sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady. The machines beside her blinked a quiet rhythm of survival. Detective Rodriguez stepped into the room. His face was unreadable. "You need to come with me," he said softly. "Now." Thomas stood carefully, trying not to wake Savannah. "What is it?" Rodriguez didn't answer until they were in the hallway. "We lost Ridge." Thomas froze. "What do you mean? He never showed up at his mandatory debrief. He didn't check in. We pinged his cruiser signals dead, turned off or smashed, and his house was empty when we sent a unit." Rodriguez ran a hand down his face. "He's gone dark." Thomas felt a wave of heat rise in his chest. "You're telling me the man who kidnapped my daughter just disappeared?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We have people watching his known associates. We're scanning the traffic cams, airports, borders. But you and Barry, you two got closer than any of us. You rattled him. He's running scared." Thomas's jaw clenched. "Or he's cleaning up loose ends." Rodriguez didn't argue. Back at the police station, Barry Granger paced the lobby, a foam coffee cup trembling in his hand. "They're not letting me see Terry yet," he muttered as Thomas entered. "Say he's stable but sedated. He's in some kind of trauma loop." Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. "They'll bring him back," he said. "He just needs time." Barry nodded, but his eyes were wild with frustration. Then the front doors opened again, and Agent Layla Moore walked in, flanked by 2 other federal officers. Her expression was hard, all steel and urgency. "I just got off a call," she said. "A DEA team following up on cartel assets found something coordinates. A burner phone linked to Ridge pinged a location northeast of town. Private property long abandoned. Registered under a shell company connected to Miguel Salazar." Rodriguez frowned. "We checked all the known cartel locations." "This wasn't known," Moore said. "It's off-grid. Hidden inside federal grazing land, accessed only through a maintenance road. And here's the kicker, it's within driving distance of where Ridge met that vehicle last night." Thomas didn't hesitate. "I'm going," he said. "No," Moore replied flatly. "This is federal territory now. We're mounting a tactical sweep." "You don't understand," Thomas said. "I know that land. My family grazed cattle there in the 80s. If there's anything hidden, anything buried, I'll know where to look." Rodriguez backed him up. "Let him come. You'll need someone who knows the terrain." Moore hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Gear up. We leave in 20. The convoy rolled out under the cover of darkness, 4 unmarked SUVs, headlights off tires, crunching over dry gravel. Moonlight painted the land silver, and the air carried that thick electric stillness that comes before storms or reckonings. Thomas rode with Rodriguez and Moore in the lead vehicle. Barry, though forbidden from joining, had slipped Thomas a folded map. "I think Ridge is heading for an old well site here," he whispered. "Terry mentioned it once, said Ridge used to hunt coyotes there before he got political." Thomas pocketed the map without comment. Now riding in silence, he unfolded it under the glow of the dash light. Coordinates scrawled in red. Same place the DEA had pinged. Barry had been right. The land narrowed into a series of box canyons, brush thickening around them. Rodriguez checked his GPS and pointed ahead. There. The lead vehicle stopped. They were close now, half a mile, maybe less. Moore raised a hand, and her agents moved out night vision goggles, suppressed weapons, careful footsteps. Thomas followed behind, heart pounding, not with fear, with purpose. They crested a rise and saw it. A barn, old splintered wood, sagging roof. But inside, faint light flickered lanterns or flashlights, and outside 3 vehicles. One was unmistakably Ridge's SUV. Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "Targets confirmed. Lights inside. Movement near the east wall." "Do we breach?" Moore asked. Rodriguez looked at Thomas. Thomas nodded, but before the agents could move, the barn door opened. A figure stumbled out. A woman. Thomas's breath caught. For a moment he thought, but it wasn't Savannah. It was another woman. Early 30s, barefoot in torn clothing. She collapsed to the ground. Rodriguez signaled. 2 agents moved silently and retrieved her. Moore leaned in. There's more than one victim. Then gunfire split the night from inside the barn. "Automatic." Moore shouted into her radio. "Engage! Engage!" Chaos erupted. Thomas hit the dirt as federal agents stormed the structure. Flashbangs lit the sky like fireworks. Gunfire crackled through the desert. Rodriguez pulled Thomas to safety behind a ridge of rock. We stayed down. Inside the barn, men shouted in Spanish. A door slammed. A vehicle engine roared to life. Thomas peeked over the rock. A black truck burst through the barn's rear wall, splintering wood as it fled into the open desert. Ridge was at the wheel. Rodriguez cursed. He's running. Without thinking, Thomas bolted for one of the nearby ATVs used by the agents. Thomas Moore shouted, but he was already on it, and seconds later, Rodriguez behind him. The chase began. The ATV screamed over the scrub brush, bouncing across dry creek beds and gullies. Ridge's truck tore ahead, headlights off, but Thomas kept him in sight, chasing the glint of metal and tail light flashes. He could see Ridge's silhouette in the cab, and he could feel deep in his gut that this was it. This was the end. Rodriguez pulled up alongside him. "We box him in at the gorge," he yelled over the engine. Thomas nodded. The gorge, an old cattle trench, ran 2 miles west of here. A dead end. Ridge was either desperate or suicidal. They crested the final ridge just as Ridge's truck skidded to a stop. He bailed out, running on foot. Thomas and Rodriguez followed. The sheriff ran like a man possessed across sand, past old fence posts, through brittle mesquite, until the trench stopped him. Dead end. He turned, gun in hand. "I'll shoot." He roared. "Don't think I won't." Rodriguez raised his weapon. "Drop it." Ridge's eyes darted. To Rodriguez, to Thomas, to the edge of the gorge. Then he smiled. "Don't you get it?" he said. "You think this ends with me. I was the leash, not the dog." Thomas stepped forward. "You were the coward. That's all." Ridge sneered, then raised his weapon. Rodriguez fired first. The shot cracked through the air, and Ridge dropped like a sack of grain. Silence. Thomas exhaled, slow, controlled, then turned away. Back at the barn, they found 4 more women. Alive, malnourished, terrified. Savannah wasn't among them, but one of the women whispered, "There's another bunker, another site." She gave them coordinates. A place Thomas knew. A well from the 1960s, capped and forgotten. A place Ridge had once called perfect for disappearing things. Thomas looked at Rodriguez, then at Moore, and said the words that would lead them into the heart of it all. "Let's dig." The coordinates from the sheriff's confiscated burner phone led Rodriguez and his team deep into the desert beyond the state highway, beyond the forgotten oil roads, into a basin of dirt and sky where not even mesquite trees bothered to grow. Thomas Walker stood in the back of a police SUV staring out across the wasteland. His boots crunched on dry gravel as he stepped down. The moonlight cast silver shadows over the terrain. A dozen officers fanned out silently, weapons drawn, guided by the scent dogs, and the hum of Rodriguez's orders crackling over the radio. "This is it," Rodriguez muttered, eyes locked on a low, rust-colored structure that looked like a collapsed cattle trough. "Signal's strongest here." Thomas didn't wait for protocol. He marched toward the structure, ignoring the shouted warnings from officers. His heart pounded with something beyond adrenaline, an instinct sharpened by 9 years of grief and rage. "Sir, step back," one of the officers called out. Rodriguez arrived at his side, breathing hard. "Let my team check it first." "Please." Thomas nodded, fists clenched. 2 officers pried the wooden frame apart, revealing a patchwork of plywood sheets nailed hastily over something much more deliberate. One officer tapped it. The echo was hollow, metal beneath. Rodriguez's voice dropped to a whisper. "Get the bolt cutters." It took 10 minutes to get the panels off. Beneath them was a square hatch, sealed with a rusted padlock and covered in industrial-grade tape. On the lock, a sheriff's star etched crudely with a pocket knife. Thomas's breath caught. Rodriguez cut the lock. The hatch creaked open with a metallic groan, releasing a gust of air so foul it sent two officers stumbling back with handkerchiefs pressed to their mouths. Thomas didn't flinch. Beneath the hatch, a ladder disappeared into the dark. "I'm going in," he said. "No," Rodriguez snapped. "I go first, then you." He descended. Thomas waited exactly 5 seconds before following. The ladder led down into a narrow corridor lit dimly by a single fluorescent bulb. The walls were concrete, sweat-stained, and mold-blistered. It smelled of ammonia bleach, and something far worse, something that rotted slowly over time. Rodriguez raised his voice. "We're law enforcement. If you're down here, show yourself. You're safe. Nothing." Then a whimper, so soft it might have been wind. Thomas's heart skipped. "Savannah," he whispered. "Sweetheart, it's me." Another whimper, this one louder. They reached a steel door at the end of the hallway. A keypad was mounted beside it. Rodriguez stepped aside, called for a tech. The officer arrived moments later, jimmied the panel open, and shorted the circuit. The door clicked. Rodriguez pushed it open slowly. Inside, under the glow of a flickering bulb, a woman sat chained to a metal bed. Her hair was matted, her skin pale, and bruised, her clothes reduced to rags. Her eyes blinked at the light, uncomprehending hollow. Then she saw Thomas. Her breath caught. "Dad!" The voice was hoarse like dry paper tearing. Thomas dropped to his knees. "I'm here, baby girl, I'm here." Savannah began to sob. Rodriguez stepped back, radioed for medics. Officers moved in, securing the room, cutting her restraints. One of them produced a blanket, wrapping it around her trembling frame. Thomas clutched her tightly, as if afraid she'd vanish again. "You came," she whispered. "I never stopped looking." They brought Savannah up on a stretcher. As soon as the air hit her face, she squinted and recoiled. Thomas walked beside her, gripping her hand. "I've got you." The ambulance was already idling at the edge of the search perimeter. The medics moved fast, attaching IVs, checking vitals. Rodriguez stayed close, barking into his phone. "She's alive. We found her. Yes, I'm sure it's her. DNA can confirm it. But Walker's ID is all I need right now." Savannah was loaded into the ambulance. Thomas climbed in after her without hesitation. The last thing he saw as the doors closed was Barry Granger standing beside a state trooper, eyes wide with stunned relief. At Alpine General, Savannah was rushed into the emergency unit. Doctors and nurses filled the room, a flurry of activity around her frail body. Thomas stood outside, the glass hands pressed to the wall. Rodriguez joined him. "She's malnourished, infected, likely drugged over a long period." Thomas didn't respond. "We're prepping a quiet room for you," Rodriguez said softly. "You need rest. I'll rest when they're all in prison," Thomas growled. Rodriguez exhaled. "You might get that chance." He pulled out his phone. "We decrypted more of the sheriff's messages. There's a network, Thomas." Ridge wasn't just enabling the cartel. He was part of it. Transport trafficking, evidence tampering. And they kept Savannah alive because Ridge wanted her. Thomas's eyes went cold. "He's going to pay. We'll start with him." Rodriguez promised. But there's more. He handed Thomas a printed list, names, dates, payment records. At the top, Miguel Salazar. Beneath that, Terry Granger, presumed alive. Last seen 2016. Thomas looked up. Barry needs to see this. Back in the hospital waiting room, Barry clutched the document with shaking hands. He's alive. Rodriguez nodded. The sheriff's messages included reference to the traffic cop in the silo. I believe they're keeping him somewhere close to the other site, a silo north of Terlingua. Barry looked up, eyes wet. We go now. First light, Rodriguez said. Tactical teams mobilizing. If we rush, we risk tipping them off. Barry didn't argue. Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll find him. At 6:00 a.m., they deployed. Helicopters hovered above as the ground team advanced toward the silo. It looked abandoned, rusted, broken fences, graffiti. But Rodriguez spotted the sensor wires buried in the dirt. Trip lines, he whispered. The team moved in. The hatch was locked, welded, booby-trapped. It took an hour to breach it safely. Inside, the air was worse than the last bunker. The space was divided into 5 cells, each no larger than a storage closet. 3 were empty. 1 held a dead body male, early 30s. The last one. Terry Barry shouted, rushing forward. His brother looked up, weakly, eyes sunken but aware. He smiled a broken, twisted smile. I knew you'd come. By noon, both Savannah and Terry were safe in the hospital. Thomas sat beside his daughter, holding her hand. You rest, he whispered. It's over. She looked at him, eyes sharp. No, Dad, it's not. And she began to tell him everything, every face, every voice, every night. Thomas listened, his grip never loosening. Outside, Alpine buzzed with news. Sheriff Ridge's arrest, the cartel connections, the victims recovered. But Thomas didn't care about the noise. He had his daughter back. And now he had names. And he wasn't done. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle hum of the IV machine. Savannah's pale face was turned toward the window where the early dawn light filtered through closed blinds. Her eyes were open but unfocused, haunted. Thomas sat beside her bed, one hand holding hers, the other clenched on his knee. Detective Rodriguez stood near the door, his notepad closed, but his attention razor-sharp. I don't know how much time we have, Savannah whispered. If Ridge was arrested, they'll already be moving. Rodriguez stepped forward. Start from the beginning. We need names, locations, anything you can remember. Savannah's voice trembled, but grew stronger as she spoke. They called it the pipeline. It started as drug running, but it turned into more people. Women mostly, some kids. They moved them from Mexico through safe houses along the border, sometimes even as far as Utah. Alpine was a hub. Sheriff Ridge. He wasn't just helping cover it up. He was part of the structure. He coordinated with Salazar, the main supplier. Ridge got a cut and made sure no one investigated too deeply. Where's Salazar now? Rodriguez asked. Savannah closed her eyes, recalling. He moves constantly. But the last I heard, they were preparing a new drop near the old mine outside Fort Davis. A big shipment, people. Maybe drugs, too. Ridge was supposed to handle the border side with a few other deputies. Rodriguez glanced at Thomas. We need to move. Now. But that's not all, Savannah added quickly. They're going to destroy the ranch, the bunker, the records, all of it, within 48 hours. Rodriguez cursed under his breath and pulled out his phone. "I'll call in the task force. State and federal. We'll set up a perimeter at Fort Davis and intercept any movement, and we'll preserve that ranch before they torch it." Thomas turned to his daughter. "You're safe now. We'll stop them." But Savannah didn't look reassured. "You don't understand. Ridge was the public face, but there's someone bigger. They called him the broker. He never shows up in person, but he runs the money, the routes, the buyers, everything. Without him, the whole thing might just move underground again." Rodriguez paused. "Do you know his name?" She nodded. "I overheard one call. His real name is Henry Fallon." Rodriguez went still. Fallon. The billionaire oil exec. Savannah's eyes filled with tears. That's the one. At the safe house. 2 hours later, the abandoned farmhouse, now a guarded crime scene, was buzzing with activity. A dozen agents in tactical gear combed through every room. Rodriguez, now back on site, briefed the command team under the canvas tent outside. Savannah Walker confirmed the existence of a cross-border trafficking network operating under the protection of Sheriff Ridge and financed by Henry Fallon. Fallon asked one of the FBI agents. "You're sure?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. She heard the name during one of the planning calls. Fallon's companies owned several properties near the southern border, drilling leases, cattle grazing land, all conveniently located along known smuggling corridors. "Jesus," someone muttered. One agent walked up carrying a heavy plastic case. "We found this buried under the silo, locked hard case, fingerprint protected, but there's something electronic inside, maybe a hard drive." Rodriguez looked at the lead agent. "Get it cracked. That could be the ledger Savannah mentioned, the one Ethan tried to preserve. If we can link that to Fallon, it's game over." In the desert. That night, Thomas returned to the ranch briefly to retrieve clothes and check on the cattle. Manuel was already back from town coordinating ranch hands and securing the perimeter. Thomas handed over a key. "If anything seems off, don't engage. Call Rodriguez directly." "You got it," Boss Manuel said, his face etched with concern. "Glad she's alive." Thomas nodded, then drove to the Alpine staging area, now serving as temporary HQ for state and federal forces. Barry was already there, sitting on a tailgate with coffee in hand, his face tired but alert. "They moved Terry to a secure rehab unit," he said quietly. "He's still barely speaking." Thomas sat beside him. "I know the feeling. Savannah hasn't said a word since this morning." "You think they'll get Fallon?" "They have to," Thomas said. "We've come too far for this to end with another dead sheriff and unanswered questions." Just then, Rodriguez stepped out of the mobile command unit, waving them over. "We just got word," he said. "Fallon's plane is scheduled to depart from a private airstrip near Marfa tonight." 11:47 p.m. "What's the plan?" Barry asked. "We raid the mine near Fort Davis, intercept the transfer, and arrest Fallon before he flees. But we're stretched thin. I need you two to stay here and monitor communications. If anything goes wrong, I need people I trust to coordinate the fallback." Thomas hesitated. "No, I'm going. If Fallon's there, I want to see the man who helped do this to my daughter." Rodriguez stared at him a moment. "All right, but stay with the second unit. Let the professionals lead." Thomas nodded. "Deal." Fort Davis, 11:22 p.m. The old mine loomed like a black scar in the hills, silent and menacing under the moonlight. Tactical teams positioned themselves around the perimeter, each unit equipped with night vision gear and body cams. Rodriguez, crouched behind an outcropping with Thomas and a group of agents, gave the final nod. Go. Flashbangs shattered the night. Gunfire erupted. The standoff was brief, but brutal. 2 smugglers were down within minutes, the rest subdued. Rodriguez rushed toward the interior. Inside, huddled under tarps, were 12 people, women and children. One girl clutched a teddy bear with duct tape still dangling from her wrist. They were hours from being moved, Rodriguez muttered. We stopped it. Thomas looked beyond them toward a table covered in maps, cache satellite phones, and a laptop still logged into a secure email server. Rodriguez's radio crackled. Fallon's plane delayed by 40 minutes due to air traffic issue. We've got time. Rodriguez turned to his tech. Clone that laptop. Now. Marfa Airstrip. 12:09 a.m. 3 black SUVs surrounded the sleek private jet as agents moved in. Fallon stood at the bottom of the staircase, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Calm, smiling. Rodriguez stepped forward, badge raised. Henry Fallon, you are under arrest for conspiracy, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. Fallon didn't resist. You're making a mistake. We have your ledger, Rodriguez said. And a witness. Fallon's face darkened slightly. She's unstable. That girl was a drugged captive. She'll say anything, maybe Rodriguez said, but the hard drive won't. Epilogue. A few days later. Savannah sat in a wheelchair under a shaded oak on the hospital grounds, watching the breeze ripple across the dry grass. Thomas sat beside her. They froze Fallon's accounts this morning, he said. The state's building a full RICO case. Savannah nodded slowly. They'll try to bury it. Make it about one corrupt sheriff, but it's so much bigger. Thomas smiled sadly. We'll keep fighting. If you're willing. Savannah turned to him, her eyes steady. I am. The courtroom was cold. Not physically, it was mid-July in Texas, and the air conditioners labored to cool the ancient brick building, but emotionally. Detached, sterile. As if the proceedings unfolding inside weren't about human trafficking, corruption, and years of torment, but merely paperwork. A logistical issue. Savannah Walker sat at the prosecution table in a dark gray suit, thinner than she once was, but with fire in her eyes. Her testimony, delivered calmly 2 days earlier, had shaken the chamber. Even the defense attorneys, high-priced and flown in from New York, had softened their tone afterward. Henry Fallon sat across the room in a navy tailored suit and polished shoes. Unshackled, unbothered. He watched Savannah with a small, amused smile. Thomas Walker sat 2 rows behind his daughter, jaw clenched, one hand resting on Barry Granger's shoulder. Beside them was Terry, out of the hospital, and thinner than his brother, remembered his left hand still bandaged. Tell me I'm not the only one who wants to knock that smile off Fallon's face, Barry whispered. You're not, Thomas said. But not today. The judge entered, called the session to order, and what followed was hours of procedural debate, defense motions, federal jurisdiction challenges, chain of evidence questions. The kind of arguments designed not to seek truth, but to stall, to confuse, to exhaust. By the time court adjourned, Savannah was trembling from suppressed rage. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Miss Walker. Is it true Sheriff Ridge personally delivered you to traffickers? Do you believe Fallon gave the order? Will you testify in the federal trial? Thomas shielded his daughter with one arm, and Barry flanked the other side as they pushed through the crowd. Rodriguez was waiting at the car, looking weary. "We got a problem," he said once they were inside. "Fallon's lawyers are petitioning to move the trial out of Texas. They're claiming bias." Savannah let out a bitter laugh. "Bias. I lived in a bunker." "They're calling you emotionally compromised," Rodriguez said, "and suggesting your ID of Fallon was planted. They say Ridge was a lone wolf who misused company assets." "Of course they are," Thomas muttered. Rodriguez looked at Thomas. "You need to prepare Savannah. If this moves federal, the case slows. Years, maybe. And if their motion to suppress the hard drive evidence sticks," he walked Savannah finished. Rodriguez didn't argue. That night, the ranch. Back at the Walker Ranch, the world was quiet again. Manuel had fixed the east fence the cattle were grazing in the distance, and the sun painted the fields in honeyed gold. But peace was deceptive. Thomas sat on the porch with Savannah, both sipping iced tea. Barry and Terry were inside preparing dinner. Terry's hand still shaky but healing. "You remember when Mom would make blueberry pie for court days?" Savannah asked. Thomas smiled faintly. "Every time. Said we needed something sweet to balance the bitter." "She knew more about justice than most lawyers," Savannah murmured. Thomas nodded, then turned to her. "We don't have to keep fighting. You've done more than anyone could have asked." Savannah's eyes hardened. "I didn't come back to disappear. If Fallon walks, others will rise. The network isn't dead, just wounded." She stood. "We go public." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Public, we release everything. The photos, the logs, the audio Ridge saved. Even if the courts stall, people will know. Pressure changes things." Thomas considered it. "That'll make you a target." Savannah shrugged. "I already was." 2 days later, the press conference. They held it on the courthouse steps. Rodriguez stood beside Savannah. So did Barry and Terry. Reporters packed the plaza, cameras, flashing microphones raised. Savannah spoke clearly. "My name is Savannah Walker. I was kidnapped, trafficked, and held captive for 9 years with the full knowledge and assistance of a law enforcement officer sworn to protect me. The man funding that operation was Henry Fallon." She held up a USB drive. "This contains everything. Bank transfers, facility blueprints, voice recordings. I am giving this to the press today. I invite every citizen to look at it, learn the truth, and demand justice." One reporter shouted, "Aren't you compromising the legal process?" "No," Savannah replied. "I'm saving it. When courts fail, truth must not." Backlash. Within 24 hours, the internet exploded. #justice for Savannah trended worldwide. Fallon's corporate partners began to pull away. Senators demanded answers. The Department of Justice announced it would open an independent investigation into judicial influence and case tampering in the district court. Fallon issued a press statement calling Savannah a confused and unstable young woman manipulated by radicals. It backfired. Her photo-thin, bruised eyes burning became the face of a movement. Later that week, a visitor. At the ranch, Thomas found Rodriguez parked near the stables, leaning against his car. "They're circling the wagons in D.C., Rodriguez said. "Fallon's friends are getting nervous." Thomas poured him a lemonade. "What's the bad news?" Rodriguez sighed. There's talk of settling. Letting Fallon walk in exchange for intel on the broader network. National security excuse. Thomas stared at him, and Rodriguez smiled grimly. I'm not letting that happen. But I'm going to need help. What kind? The kind that breaks ranks. Thomas leaned back. You want to leak more? Rodriguez nodded. But carefully, targeted. He looked up at the ranch house. Savannah's stronger than anyone I've ever met, but they'll keep coming for her. You're ready to fight again? Thomas didn't hesitate. I never stopped. The morning sun rose heavy and red over West Texas, casting long shadows across the arid land. In the distance, dust plumes curled from a convoy of black SUVs, snaking their way down a dirt road that hadn't seen this much traffic in years. Inside the lead vehicle, Thomas Walker sat in the front passenger seat, his hands clenched, knuckles pale, watching the horizon. Beside him, Captain Andrea Torres of the Texas Rangers tapped her thumb against her radio, waiting for the green light. This is it, she said quietly. After today, there's no more hiding. In the back seat, Barry Granger shifted the bruise along his temple, a sickly yellow. We sure they're still there. They moved everything underground, Thomas replied grimly. But Savannah knew where to look, and Terry backed it up. Captain Torres looked at Thomas. Your daughter's going to testify in court. She doesn't have to be part of this. She asked to come, Thomas said, jaw tight. She wants to finish it. So do I. The captain nodded. Let's finish it. At the back of the convoy, in an unmarked police SUV, Savannah sat beside Terry Granger. They wore bulletproof vests beneath plain clothes, the inside of the car lined with legal folders and court files. Savannah's face was still pale, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. You sure you're okay with this? Terry asked. Savannah exhaled slowly. He took 9 years of my life. This is my justice. They drove in silence for a while before she added, You know they're going to try to make this disappear, right? Fallon had friends in the judiciary. Ridge had dirt on half the local officials. If we don't catch the whole web, it grows back. Terry nodded. That's why the Rangers are here. That's why we're broadcasting the raid live to federal agents and press liaisons. No more secrets. The convoy came to a stop at the edge of an abandoned horse training compound. Faded white fencing surrounded long-deserted corrals and a decrepit barn. The real operation, however, lay beneath. The compound's outer buildings were a ruse. Hidden in the hay barn was a hydraulic platform that descended into an elaborate subterranean network, what Ridge and Fallon called the catacombs. Originally a Cold War-era civil defense shelter, it had been expanded illegally over the years into a warren of hallways, medical suites, storage chambers, and holding cells. According to Savannah and Terry's intel, the catacombs had been reactivated 6 months earlier to serve as a backup hub for trafficking when the old ranch was compromised. They've been moving women, drugs, cash, and records through here, Savannah explained to the Rangers as they prepared to breach. But the real treasure is the ledger. Not the fake one Fallon burned on TV, the real one Ridge used for blackmail. The one with the initials. Captain Torres adjusted her headset. You're certain I was his house guest for 9 years, Savannah said dryly. I cleaned his floors. I did his laundry. I emptied his shredder. Torres smiled faintly. We'll find it. The assault began at 07:45 a.m. At 3 access points, breaching charges blew steel doors off their hinges. Flashbangs rattled the compound. Rangers stormed in, shouting warnings, weapons ready. Resistance came swiftly. Armed guards, some cartel muscle, others local hires, but they weren't trained for tactical combat. Within 10 minutes, the perimeter was secure. Within 20, most of the catacombs had been cleared, but not the vault room. That's where Ridge kept everything, Savannah said, breathless, as she guided Torres down a steel corridor. Files, hard drives, burner phones. We need it. 2 guards remained dug in behind overturned furniture in a chamber lined with cinder block walls. Gunfire rang out as the Rangers returned fire. Barry and Thomas crouched behind a concrete column, pinned down. "Damn it," Barry muttered. "They're trying to torch it." Flames licked up the edge of a filing cabinet. Torres gave the signal. One of her men hurled a tear gas canister inside. The guards coughed, vision obscured. Seconds later, Rangers breached, disarming them and dragging them out. Savannah bolted forward, covering her mouth with her sleeve. "Start with the floor safe," she instructed. Behind the rack of coats. 2 Rangers pried the panel loose, revealing a reinforced steel door with a digital lock. "Code's Ridge's daughter's birthday," Savannah muttered. "He used it for everything." It opened on the first try. Inside were rows of ledgers, USB drives, VHS tapes, even old 8mm reels. Some boxes were labeled insurance. Others read DA compromised. Senator 2017. Thomas stared at the stack of documentation. This is everything." "No," Savannah corrected. "This is the beginning." By noon, federal agents had taken custody of the vault contents. The rest of the catacombs was being cataloged and swept for evidence. 32 people were arrested. 5 women and 2 children were rescued. Weapons, narcotics, and counterfeit IDs were seized. The news helicopters arrived by 1 p.m. Captain Torres, standing before the media, summarized the bust. This was not the work of one corrupt sheriff. This was an organized criminal enterprise that stretched from the Texas border to Washington, D.C. But today, it ends. Behind her, Savannah stood with Terry and Thomas. Reporters clamored for statements, but she remained silent. Thomas squeezed her hand. "You did it." "No," she said, "we all did. The trial took months." Fallon, arrested in his Austin penthouse, pleaded not guilty. He claimed the entire network was a fabrication. Ridge refused to speak, spending his days in solitary confinement after an attempt to bribe another inmate into killing him failed. The real trial wasn't in court. It was in the public eye. Every document from the vault was made public. Every name, every dollar, every cover-up. A senator resigned. 2 judges were indicted. 1 former FBI agent fled the country. Thomas testified first, then Savannah, then Terry. Their stories echoed across the nation. The pipeline had run through West Texas for 2 decades, and it had taken 2 grieving men, a survivor, and a small-town detective to tear it down. 9 months later, Savannah returned to the Walker Ranch for the first time since her rescue. The land hadn't changed much. The fields still swayed under the breeze, and the cattle roamed like sentinels of the past. But everything else was different. Manuel greeted her at the gate. "You look stronger," he said. "I feel stronger," she replied. Inside the main house, Thomas had framed her childhood ribbons and medals again. In the kitchen, her mother's recipe book was propped open on the counter. "I've been trying your chili," he said, sheepish. "Still can't get it right." Savannah smiled. "You'll get there." They spent the afternoon on the porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. "There's a hearing next week," Savannah said. "For what?" "For Ridge's sentencing." She hesitated. "I'm giving a statement. Would you come?" Thomas nodded. Every step of the way. The courtroom was quiet when Savannah stood to speak. Ridge, shackled and gaunt, barely raised his eyes. "You took nearly a decade from me," she said, "but you didn't break me. And every time I look at my father or the other women you hurt, I see the same thing, survival. You don't get to define us. We do." When she stepped down, Ridge finally looked at her. But it wasn't hate in his eyes. It was fear. Because for the first time, the man who had controlled everything controlled nothing. He was sentenced to life without parole. Back in Alpine, a plaque was installed outside the sheriff's office. It bore the names of the victims. Savannah's was there not as a victim, but as a survivor. At the ceremony, Captain Torres handed Savannah a small medal. For valor, she said, but also for vision. Barry and Terry stood beside Thomas. The Granger brothers, now reconciled, had started a nonprofit for victims of law enforcement abuse. They named it the 314 Foundation after Savannah's hospital room. Savannah hugged Thomas tightly. "It's over." Thomas shook his head. "No, it's just beginning. But now we get to choose what comes next." As the crowd dispersed, the four of them stood together beneath the Texan sun. The land was still scarred, but it would heal, and so would they.